You're listening to Journey Back, the podcast about past life regressions, ghosts, and much more with your host, Cliff Aguirre.
Today on this Journey Back podcast, I have a special guest, Simon Bown from the UK podcast, Past Life Hypnosis. And Simon will be talking about his own past life regressions, past life case studies, and much more. So here's my interview with Simon Bown.
Hello.
It's great to have you here.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Well, we originally met back in April of this year when I was on your podcast to talk about my book, Journey Back. So thank you for the opportunity to do that.
No, that was a great conversation we had.
So tell me a little bit about your background and how you got into past life investigation and regressions.
Well, I've always had a fascination with paranormal and supernatural things. I remember when I was 10 years old taking all the books out of the local public library on paranormal and ghosts and things. Reading the books over time, I found that I had a particular interest in the afterlife and UFOs. And when I got older and I started having my own income, I started going to the College of Psychic Studies in the centre of London, which is quite an old establishment. It's been going over 100 years. And they would have evenings there where they would have clairvoyants and mediums, trance channels, people that did past life regression. And so once every 3 or 4 weeks, I would go there and see someone. And each time it would be a different person with a different kind of discipline. And I just found it fascinating and doing all this investigation. And that was back in the 1980s. So I've been doing this kind of investigation and been interested in it for decades, literally. And it was there at the College of Psychic Studies that I did my first past life regression. And a woman took me into a past life, which was I found to be a very powerful experience. And it was quite eye-opening because everything I'd done before that, when I'd gone there, I'd been talking to a medium or a clairvoyant, and you don't actually experience something yourself. You just kind of sit there and wait for them to tell you things.
What was your experience?
Well, I was taken into the hypnosis, and we got to that point where I would start viewing the past life, and I found myself to be a little girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old. And I remember I was lying back on a couch and my eyes were half closed and I was just looking down and I could almost see these feet, bare feet, little girl's feet, sort of where my knees were. And I was in a park and I could feel the grass between my toes. And for some reason, I knew that it was about the year 1890, 1895. And it was a peculiar park because it was on such a steep slope. And I looked up and there was a woman there and a man and a dog, and they had a pram with them with a baby in it. And I just knew that baby was my little brother in that life. And the dog was running around like a mad thing. And then we went to the house, and I remember what the house looked like and the front door when we went in. And then we moved forward in that life, and I was a nurse in the First World War in France. And I can remember the tents and all these soldiers lying on these benches and a feeling of menace in a way. And I also got a very strong impression that the person that was the father in that life is now my best friend in this life.
Oh, wow.
So, but after that, and this was a few years later, I was going through North London and there was the park.
The same exact one?
The exact same one. And it was easy to recognize because it was on such a slope. And you would think if they were going to put a park somewhere, it wouldn't be on this steep slope.
Right.
And it was very easily spotted. I could tell straight away. And it's called Primrose Hill. And it's in the north of London. It's got a great view looking down over London, and you can see the centre of the city. But also the houses in that neighbourhood around the park are exactly the same as the house I saw in that past life. The big front door with the steps leading up to it and these kind of columns either side.
Did you have any feeling when you went into the park or anything from the past?
Well, not really. It was a little eerie, I would say that. So that was my first experience with past life regression.
How many have you had?
Well, I must have looked through, let's see, 7 past lives, perhaps 8. And they've all been very powerful experiences. And it's amazing how much emotion can be there. And I've always felt that if it was just my imagination, or if it was some deep part of my mind bringing back something perhaps from a TV show or a book I'd read, then the emotion wouldn't be there like that.
What did you kind of discover by going through all these past lives? Was there any overall kind of awareness, like realization about your existence and life and anything like that?
Well, it certainly has brought about a feeling that there is an ongoing process of reincarnation, and that we all live many lives, and in those lives we exist in all the different social situations. We're all born male or female, we're all born perhaps into rich lives or poor lives, and we experience so much over time.
So some people say when they go into these past life regressions, or when they have dreams about past lives or whatever, suddenly their fear about death disappears. Did you find that?
Yeah, I do feel that that has gone away. I suppose when I was a lot younger, there's more fear of that for some reason. You get older, you get more used to the idea that this is going to happen to you.
Mm-hmm.
But now I don't feel that death would be the end of it. I feel it would be a transition onto something else. But I also feel like I don't know what that would be. Even after decades of reading books and having experiences, I still feel like there's something to it that we can't quite grasp here.
You were talking about case studies. What did you discover from many of the case studies that you researched?
I find that some of them can be quite vague. Some people get feelings when I've taken them into past life regressions, and where they see scenes and they see something, but they can't quite grasp it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was training in past life regression, what we were told was that it's your higher self or your soul that would decide which life is right for you to view at that time. And so I'm wondering, sometimes when I take somebody into past life regression and they don't really get much for it, it's because they are not really supposed to.
When I do past life regressions on some people, I've had a few that have had suddenly this black whirling feeling about them. And what I discovered was that they're blocking something, that there was something terrible that they didn't want to see. And so I had to take them before that whirling started to find out what it was that they were afraid to see. Have you ever had that happen? Any of your clients?
I haven't done that. I haven't been... there is kind of like, there is a block there, and I keep moving them around and asking them questions, but obviously they have to be very open questions, because you can't lead them and suggest things.
Not at all, yeah.
So I have found that to be quite difficult. But you saying that, it kind of suggests might be a conflict there, almost as if your higher self is trying to show you something, but there's another part of you who doesn't want to see it.
Like your ego's afraid of it or something, yeah.
Yeah, like your conscious is battling with your subconscious.
I've only had maybe 2 or 3 people that have gone through that, but I started recognizing that was a trend that started happening when they had an emotional wall that they hit. You were talking about meeting your spirit guide in a past life regression.
That was a past life regression where I was once again I was in a past life. This was years after the first one, and I found myself in what I think was the 1950s London. I was a young man, and I was wearing a suit that was the latest fashion, and my hair was the latest fashion, And it was kind of like, I thought I was fantastic. And it was like, hey, everybody check me out. And I walked into this pub and suddenly I just shot through the ceiling. I just went up and up and up and until I was in orbit. I was looking down on planet Earth. And it was the strangest thing. And I looked to my right and this hole in space opened up. And it was black and it got bigger and bigger. And I started moving towards it. And I got to the edge of this hole and I looked into it and it was completely black. And I started to feel a little afraid. And I thought, I don't want to go in there. I don't know what is down there. And that sentence came into my mind, the valley of the shadow of death. And then I moved away from it. And then suddenly it was like an instant later, I was back in the room with the hypnotist. And I was sitting on the chair and I was still hypnotized and he was opposite me. And I became aware of a presence next to me in the room. And this is a difficult thing to explain, how it just sort of came to me. And I imagine that this might be the way talented mediums pick up on spirits. But it was right next to me and it came close and it was as though the left-hand cheek of this face was touching my cheek. And it was looking past me, but I could tell it had a huge smile on its face. And I got a message from it that said, we are so glad that you came here today to do this. We are so pleased that you're here. And it was then that I became aware of another group of spirits or entities to my right. And even though there was a wall there, I could sort of see them maybe 20 feet away, all standing together in a group, and I got a tremendous sense of happiness coming from them. Like they were really pleased that I had done this past life regression. And I couldn't actually see them. It was more like they were silhouettes and there was a really bright light behind them. And then this other spirit was right next to me, which I really got the impression it was my spirit guide, said, that's all you need today. We don't need to do anymore. And I said to the hypnotist, and he said, okay, well, we should finish now then, if that's what they're saying. We should end the session. But it was quite an intense session for me, the lives we looked at. And I came away from it feeling that was when I first thought that I wanted to get into becoming a hypnotherapist and doing past life regressions. So it was almost like I was on a spiritual path. I don't know if that sounds pretentious.
No, not at all. How long have you been doing past life regressions and hypnosis?
Well, I passed I got my diploma a few years ago, and that's in the UK. I got it with the National Council for Hypnotherapy and also on the General Hypnotherapy Register. And you have to have these certificates and this diploma to work with the National Health Service. And it was quite an intensive course. It was 10 months, and my portfolio was 78,000 words when I handed it in. So it was. I put in a lot of work, but it was definitely worth it, because when you study like that, you really do learn these things. And the thing was that several years beforehand, and I had two instances, and these were a decade apart, approximately, where I was stopped in the street by somebody, and they said to me, do you know what a medium is? And I said, yes. And they said, I'm a medium, and I'm just walking down the street here, and I got a strong message from the spirits that I should stop you and tell you something. They said to tell you that you're going to be a great healer at some point in the future. And so that happened, perhaps maybe about 1990. And then it happened again about 10 years later in a completely different place. And then when I went on and had that hypnotherapy, past life regression that I was just talking about, where I met the spirit guide, it was those three things which really made me feel like I was on some sort of a spiritual path leading to become some sort of a healer. And that's why I went into the hypnotherapy, because I find the hypnosis really fascinating.
So these were people that you had just never met before, and they just stopped you in the middle of the street?
That's right.
That's
yeah.
amazing.
And also I did have other times where mediums had passed that on to me when I'd gone to see them for some reason. And then recently on one of my podcasts, I was talking to a man called Terry Yoder, who's a medium, and he'd had a near-death experience. And it was after that near-death experience that his psychic powers awakened. And towards the end of the interview, he said, I've got a message for you from my guides. They said to tell you that you're already a healer. There's people listening to your podcasts who are getting some kind of healing from them. That was nice to hear.
From the many podcasts that you've had, is there any stories that really stand out?
Yeah, I mean, I talked to a lady called Nancy Rhines who'd had a near-death experience, and I found what she was saying to be particularly interesting. She even got a little tearful during the interview when she was telling me about she went to this space when she died that was specifically constructed for her. She said it was a most beautiful landscape with forest and mountains in the distance, and a spirit guide came to her, and they were walking through all this grass, and she turned around and looked behind her, and the whole landscape was just falling away into a mist. And they said that this whole area was constructed just for her, so that the near-death experience would be the most effective. And she's actually a talented artist, and she's painted paintings of that spirit guide, and also one of the members of her group she called her spirit team, like a soul group that she's a part of.
I understand that you also have stories about UFO sightings.
Yeah, it's a thing where I've had these experiences through my life. I've heard a phrase that was, if you start looking into these things, they start looking back. And it's when you get on the more weirder theories of consciousness and UFOs and near-death experiences and things. And I've noticed how these things cross over in certain places. I was playing bass with my band in a town out to the west of London on a Sunday night. It was a blues jam night, and we finished up, and I was driving back into London about 1 o'clock in the morning, and it was on this motorway that was completely empty. There were no other cars, and I noticed off to the left that there was a really bright light, and I knew this stretch of the motorway quite well, and I knew that on the other side of the fence there were no buildings. There was nothing there. It was just empty fields. And I thought it was quite odd. And I thought perhaps there was some emergency works going on, like maybe a gas main or something. And as you know, over here we drive on the left. So this was on my side of the motorway. And I slowed down. And just when I got past some trees that were blocking the view is when I saw this UFO. And it was stationary, and it was perhaps 30 feet off the ground and maybe 200 feet from the side of the motorway. It was the size of a large house, and it was stationary, and it didn't make a sound. And all across the bottom of it were many, many pin spot red lights. And it was the shape of, I suppose I'd call it a rugby ball. You would call it a football. And at one end of it, there was a really, really powerful bright spotlight pointing at the ground. And I slowed my speed down to about 5 miles an hour. And I was leaning forward and looking out the windscreen, looking up at it. And I got a really good look at it. And then I just increased my speed and went home, which does seem a little odd to me, since I had such a great interest in UFOs that I would just carry on my journey. But that was a great sighting. And it's not just that I saw a little light in the sky. I was close up with a craft. And a few years later, I was doing another gig. This time I'd moved to the south coast, and I had to drive across an area that's a national park called the New Forest. And this is a protected land. You're not allowed to build there. You're not allowed to do anything. And the animals are free to walk across it. They have these little single track roads that you can drive round, and you can come round a corner and there'll just be a whole bunch of horses standing on the road, and you just have to wait till they move. And so I was driving across the New Forest on the only one fast road that you can use. And I looked to my right, and there was an orange ball of light above a tree. and it was about the size of a car, and it lit up the whole area all around it. Now, I drive that stretch of road every day on my commute to work, so I know there's nothing there. And I did actually go there recently and went right up to that tree that it was hovering over, and there was nothing there that could account for that light.
What did you feel about it, about these two sightings? Did you have any feelings that came from them or anything?
Not particularly, no. I had a weird little synchronicity, and it's almost a synchronicity. You could look at it and say, no, that doesn't mean anything. But when it happens to yourself, it really clicks. And the thing was, I was driving back from the gig, and this was perhaps 2:00 in the morning. I was coming back, and I was listening to a podcast where this guy, Mike Cleland, was interviewing a UFO expert. And Mike Cleland was telling him about how he had this experience where he woke up one night and looked out his bedroom window, and there's this big ball of orange light outside his window. And just when I got to the spot where I saw a big ball of orange light, the expert said, "Oh, you know what that orange light was now, don't you?" And it was a kind of synchronicity of him saying that to me on that interview, exactly when I got to that point. That clicked for me, and it does make you think when you see that, or you hear that sort of synchronicity.
It does. There's a lot of people out there that probably have these experiences that never talk about it.
Yeah, that's I think there's an estimate I heard recently, because I listen to UFO podcasts as well, that there's something like 10,000 sightings a year, and maybe only 2 or 3% get reported to anybody.
Well, I know recently the U.S. Air Force released something about some fighter jets that were following this UFO, and they couldn't explain it.
Yeah. They called it the Tic Tac incident because the UFOs were the shape of Tic Tac.
You also mentioned something about that you get psychic flashes that you've had in the past. What are those?
Yeah, it's a weird thing. It's not deja vu because everybody knows how that feels. One example is that I was due to go to my friend's wedding in New Zealand, and this was about 2 weeks beforehand. I was in London, and she'd asked me to buy her a present, something really kind of cheap and tacky that was represented London. So I went into the centre of town to one of those awful tourist shops to buy something. And I suddenly found myself in a vision where I was sitting next to her in the car and she was driving. And it was this old red car going through suburban Christchurch in New Zealand. And the houses have very distinctive look to them that's not like any other suburbia I've seen. And we were having this conversation, and I noticed a couple of the street signs, the names of the roads, and then suddenly I was back in London again. So then about 2 weeks later, I was in New Zealand, and that vision that I'd seen happened exactly the same.
Wow.
And it was about 30 or 45 seconds a time. And the way all the houses looked was exactly as I'd seen them. And I'd never been to Christchurch before. I wouldn't know what suburbia looked like. And the street names were the same. She was driving this old car exactly as I'd seen it. And we were having that conversation. So these sort of things pop up now and again for me. And I don't know where they come from or what they mean, if they mean anything.
What's your theory on that? Why do you think that happens?
I don't know. It's I have this idea that, time doesn't really exist.
Mm-hmm.
When we die, we go into some kind of area that's eternal or infinite, that there is no time. And that perhaps sometimes we tap into that and our minds can jump forwards in time a little bit.
I've heard theories that there's a lot of probabilities out there of what could happen, may not happen. And sometimes we can tune into those probabilities, and then suddenly the probabilities become realities. And some people say, well, maybe that's what deja vu is all about. Or, we're aware that we're going to do something in the future. Then when it does happen, we go, wow, this is great. But our higher consciousness is actually so vast that we're tuning into all this stuff. So that's what I've heard.
Yeah, yeah. Because I think that when we incarnate on this planet, it's not like our body houses our entire soul. I think we're just a small part of our soul in each life.
I kind of tell people, that's our database. We plug into our database every so often. I think there's a lot more to us than a lot of people, give credit to themselves for.
Well, I was talking to a lady the other day on my podcast called Tony Riley. She does past life regressions in Australia, and she pretty much said exactly the same thing as her idea of how it works, because she said she's a medium, and somebody said to her, how is it that you can communicate with spirits if they've already reincarnated? Surely there'd be no one to talk to. But she said it's like they still exist within the soul in some form, and that energy can be called upon when it's needed.
And, even all of our past lives, there's still personalities that are out there. And if you're sitting across from me, I can see you, but there could be other parts of you someplace else. Such a vast theory of possibilities out there.
Yeah. It's all still so mysterious as well. There's been so many studies done over decades now, even back in the Society of Psychical Research in Victorian London, that but at the end of the day, we still don't know.
Well, there's a story here about the president, Abraham Lincoln, who had a premonition that he was going to die, and he had the premonition the night before he got shot. Yeah, I guess he wrote it down somewhere or told somebody about it. It's pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah, and I find that when I've looked at all these different areas of the paranormal, they in places they bleed into each other. I was listening to an interview with Whitley Strieber, who's the author who wrote Communion. Okay. He talked about his alien abduction experiences. And he said after the book was published, he started receiving letters. And he said he must have received 10,000 letters from people saying they'd have the same sort of experiences. Mm-hmm. And his wife read every single letter, and she came to him afterwards and said, this has got something to do with death. And she said she was reading reports where people were saying they saw dead loved ones amongst the aliens or in the background when they were going through their abduction experience.
Wow.
So I don't know what you think of that whole alien abduction thing. I find it fascinating, and I don't know if it's true or not, but it's another thing where the aliens have said to people that actually humans are just containers or vessels.
I don't know what to think about UFOs. I know when I was in high school, I woke up one night and there was these beams of light that were flashing through the windows into my bedroom, and they lit up the whole bedroom. And maybe it lasted 30 seconds or something like this, and then suddenly it disappeared. Now, I don't know if the mothership was outside my bedroom window and they got impatient because I never went to the window or what. But I was wide awake, and I remember seeing these lights. And just to this day, I just don't know what that was all about. But I used to have dreams about UFOs coming over the mountain range above my house and all that stuff. So I don't know. I know that we're not the only species in this universe or, any realities or anything like this, but it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I find it's like all of these subjects that we're interested in. The more you look at it, the more you realize how complicated it is. And I get more of the impression that the UFOs and the occupants, if they are around, are actually much more interdimensional rather than interstellar.
I don't know if you ever had that in the UK, but we had this program called The Twilight Zone.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we used to see that.
I think it was the Twilight Zone where these aliens came to Earth. They wanted to bring humans with them back to their planet, and they were promising them a brand new great life and everything like this. And then once they got on board the UFO, they found this book, and then they opened it up to interpret to see what it was. And it was a cooking book on how to cook humans. And all these people were going to be, meals and stuff like this. Anyway, that's just a funny story. Have you ever had anybody that you've taken to a past life regression that have told you their first and last name, their addresses, what town they lived in, and really precise information like that?
No, I haven't. And I do ask if they can pick up anything like that. I've had them say their name was Jonathan or Tom, or they were living in London, but I've never been able to get somebody to be more specific than that.
I think I've only had two, and I really haven't been able to really pinpoint whether I could find those people or not.
I did have a past life regression where I saw myself as a woman in 17th century Italy, wearing these big clunky shoes, and I thought, that's not right. Surely women didn't wear those big clunky shoes in that time. But I Googled it and I found them almost exactly the same as that I'd seen in that life. So that was some form of verification.
I took this one woman back, and she went back to San Francisco in the 1900s. And, they had a big earthquake in 1906. And while she was under hypnosis, she was talking about the earthquake, but she kept saying that she heard this person playing a violin. And I thought, well, that's strange and everything. I did some research and found out that the mayor of San Francisco at the time of the earthquake was a violinist in the San Francisco Philharmonic. And I just went, wow, amazing stuff.
Yeah.
So to kind of sum this whole thing up, what do you feel about past life regressions? What do you feel about life after you've, experienced it on your own, but also took other people through these regressions? What do you think about it all?
Well, I feel like I can be quite skeptical, and I won't just accept any old thing that I hear about any of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's a male thing or what it is. I'd say that I've got to the point where I'm 99% sure that we all live many lives, and that our soul is living all of those lives, perhaps in one moment, that as it lives in a space where there is no time, our lives are not lived sequentially, but all at one moment, and this soul is experiencing all of our lives all at one moment. And I don't really think there's anything to fear there. I don't think there's any judgment when we die, apart from how we judge ourselves. But that's what I find fascinating, is that I do research and read up a lot about near-death experiences, about reincarnation, past life regressions, UFOs, and other things, also deathbed visions, terminal lucidity. And you start getting a much wider view of all these different things, and you can see how they can connect. And the more you see of all these different things, the more you realize that there is a real reality to this, and it's not just mumbo jumbo.
I was telling somebody recently that since I've been doing this for so long, it's kind of like I can't even relate to not knowing anything about this or not believing in this vast continuation of our soul or whatever. I don't know what it feels like to not think that way any longer.
Yeah.
Have you run across that?
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's been so many decades I've been so interested in it, and these little verifications of just experiences I've had myself. I do find that sort of thought to be quite alien, and I also find that I don't talk to people about it.
Right.
Because you might be like, you're an expert in this area, and you can find someone who's not at all an expert, has done no research, has had no experience, and they think that their opinion is as valid as yours.
Right.
And they don't accept you to be an expert. If perhaps you were a lawyer or a doctor, they would, because you've been to that big college, but they won't take your experience as an expertise they should listen to.
I find that I would never argue the point. I always say, well, you'll find out in the end anyway,
Yeah.
What's really out there. But, the funny thing is I'll go by, past a funeral or something, and instead of going, oh, I feel so bad. Not that I don't have feelings, but I think, wow, I can just imagine what that person must be experiencing at this moment. They left their body, they're looking around, they're going, what's going on? And all that stuff. So I find it just fascinating just to imagine what that person is experiencing.
Yeah. I imagine it's something like the near-death experience.
Yeah.
When they talk about they go to a realm where there's some feeling of tremendous unconditional love.
Well, thank you for being my guest on Journey Back today. And could you tell my listeners where they can find your podcast?
Yeah, my podcast is on as many places as I can get it. So it's on Stitcher and Apple Podcasts. It's on Spotify, Google Play, SoundCloud, YouTube. And I've got my website, which is pastliveshypnosis.co.uk.
And I also understand that you write some short stories.
Yeah, I've had a hobby for years of writing science fiction. There's a collection of short stories on Amazon. It's called November Asteroid. And my name's Simon Bown. And my novel's finished. I just need to find some time to get the final points done, like sorting out the cover and that sort of thing. But I'm happy to have written a novel. I don't know if I'd do it again. It was a lot of work.
Well, I'm going to put links to your website and also to your podcast and your book on my podcast website.
That's great.
So I really appreciate you being here, and it's always great talking to you.
Yeah, and I'll have to invite you back also to be on my podcast again, because I wanted to talk to you about your other books as well.
Okay, that sounds like a great thing.
That was Simon Bown from Past Life Hypnosis, located in the United Kingdom. Make sure to subscribe to the Journey Back podcast so you won't miss other interesting guests and stories, and spread the word so others can join in the experience. And you can buy my book, Journey Back, The Amazing Memories of Individuals Through Past Life Regression, or any of my other books on Amazon.com or at cliffbooksmusic.com. I'm also available for podcast interviews, lectures on the subject of hypnosis and past life regressions, and more. You can contact me at journeybackpodcast@gmail.com. So thank you for listening.